I never thought a simple trip to the grocery store would lead to me uncovering a lie that had been rotting at the center of my marriage for over a decade. But here I am, sitting in a silent house wondering if the woman I've loved for 10 years ever even existed. How do you look at the person you've woken up next to every single morning and realize you don't even know what they actually look like, or more importantly, who they really are? I'm standing at a crossroads where my heart is telling me to forgive, but my mind is screaming that I've been the victim of a decade-long con. Before I get into the grit of how it all fell apart, I have to ask you straight up. If you found out your spouse had been wearing a literal mask, both emotionally and physically, for 10 years, would you stay because of the history, or would you walk out the door and never look back? Tell me, was I wrong for feeling like my entire life was a scripted reality show where I was the only person who didn't know the plot? To understand how we got to this point, I have to take you back to the very beginning, to the night I met Sarah. It was a rainy Tuesday at a small library in our college town, and she was tucked away in a corner booth, her face partially obscured by a heavy scarf and a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. She was quiet, mysterious, and incredibly brilliant. We started talking about some obscure historical philosophy, and I was hooked instantly. But there was always something a little different about her routine. Even back then, she was incredibly self-conscious. She told me she had been in a horrific car accident when she was younger that left her with deep facial scarring and sensitive skin that couldn't handle direct sunlight or most types of makeup. Because of this, she always wore heavy foundation, scarves, or kept her hair draped forward in a way that masked her profile. As our relationship grew, so did my protective nature over her. I didn't care about the scars she told me about. I loved her mind, her laugh, and the way she made me feel like the most important person in the room. When we moved in together, she had a very strict lights-off rule for intimacy and a morning routine that involved her being in the bathroom for an hour before I even woke up. She told me it was because she was ashamed of the disfigurement and didn't want to repulse me. I felt so much empathy for her. I would tell her, "Sarah, I love you for who you are, I don't need to see the scars." And she would just cry and thank me for being so understanding. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony where she wore a traditional veil that she never fully lifted, claiming her skin was having a flare-up due to the stress. Our friends and my family just accepted it as Sarah's thing. She was the kindest, most supportive wife anyone could ask for. She helped me build my business, she was there through my father's passing, and she was the pillar of our home. For 10 years, I lived in a bubble of bliss, believing I was the hero in a story about looking past physical imperfections to find a beautiful soul. I never questioned the thick layers of specialized medical makeup she ordered from overseas, or the fact that she never went swimming or stayed out in the heat. I thought I was protecting her dignity. Every anniversary, I'd buy her expensive skincare that she claimed she needed, and I'd feel a sense of pride that I was the only man patient enough to handle her delicate state. I remember one specific time we went to the beach. She stayed under a massive umbrella, covered from head to toe in linen, while I played in the waves. I felt a pang of sadness that she couldn't enjoy the sun with me, but she just smiled and said, "As long as I can see you happy, I'm happy." Looking back, that smile was probably a smirk at how easy I was to manipulate. I spent years defending her to my mother, who thought it was weird that she never saw Sarah's face clearly in bright light. I almost cut my own mother off for being insensitive to Sarah's trauma. I was her knight in shining armor, or so I thought, but in reality, I was just a character in a script she was writing every single day. The level of detail she went into was insane. She had fake prescription bottles for dermatological creams that were actually just expensive moisturizers relabeled. She would occasionally accidentally let me catch a glimpse of what looked like red, raw skin in the dark, which I now realize was just clever stage makeup or theatrical blood. She played the long game better than any professional gambler I've ever met. Our entire life was built on this foundation of pity and unconditional love that I provided, while she provided a performance that should have won an Oscar. I worked extra hours to afford the treatments she said she needed, which she claimed weren't covered by insurance. I sacrificed vacations to tropical islands because she couldn't handle the UV index. I changed my entire lifestyle to accommodate a ghost. But then last month, the bubble didn't just pop, it disintegrated. It started with something as mundane as a forgotten phone. Sarah had gone to her weekly specialist appointment 2 towns over, something she'd been doing for years to manage her condition. About 30 minutes after she left, I noticed her secondary phone, the one she used for her medical records and insurance, buzzing incessantly on the kitchen counter. Usually I never touch her things, but the caller ID just said the agency, and the messages popping up were cryptic, mentioning final payments and contract expiration. My curiosity, fueled by a sudden inexplicable gut feeling, got the better of me. I managed to bypass the simple passcode. It was our anniversary date, and what I found made my blood run cold. There were no medical records. There were no doctors. Instead, there were dozens of high-resolution photos of Sarah, but not the Sarah I knew. In these photos, her skin was flawless. There were no scars, no disfigurement, nothing. But more shockingly, there were photos of her in various high-end settings, dressed in clothes I'd never seen, standing next to people who looked like high-profile executives. I scrolled further back and found emails dating back 12 years. It turns out the agency was a high-stakes social research firm. Sarah hadn't been a victim of an accident. She was a participant in a long-term sociological study about the longevity of deception and the perception of beauty in domestic environments. She was being paid, heavily, to live a life based on a lie to see how long a partner would stay without ever seeing the true face of their spouse. Every tear, every moment of shame, every flare-up, was a logged data point. My entire marriage, our 10 years of memories, our late-night talks, were all being monitored as part of a psychological experiment. I found spreadsheets detailing my reactions to her episodes. There were notes on how many times I told her she was beautiful despite her scars, and how much money I spent on her fake treatments. They were measuring my empathy threshold. I felt like a bug under a microscope. I saw video clips from hidden cameras in our own bedroom that I never knew existed, showing me comforting her in the dark. The agency had been watching us have dinner, watching us sleep, watching us live our most private moments, all to see if my love would waver. I found a document titled Final Phase, Exit Strategy, which detailed how she was supposed to fake a medical emergency to leave the marriage once the study concluded. She wasn't just lying about her face. She was planning her disappearance while I was planning our retirement. So here I am, standing in the middle of this mess, having found out that my wife is essentially a paid actress and I am her unwitting co-star. I haven't confronted her yet. She's due home in an hour, and I have the phone, the photos, and the contract details laid out on the table. But before I tell you how that confrontation went and the absolute explosion that followed, I need you to do something for me. I'm sitting here questioning my own reality. Was the love real even if the person was a character? I want you to pause right now and go to the comments. Tell me, if you found out your entire relationship was a paid experiment, would you burn it all down, or would you try to see if the feelings underneath were real? What would you do in my shoes? The hour she was gone felt like a century. When I heard her key in the lock, my heart was hammering so hard I thought it would crack a rib. She walked in smiling, her face obscured as usual by that heavy fringe and the medical concealer. She started talking about the traffic, totally normal, totally casual. I just pointed to the table. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched her eyes move from me to the phone, to the printed emails, and finally back to me. The mask didn't just slip, it fell off. But not in the way you'd think. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just sat down, sighed, and her entire posture changed. The shy, insecure Sarah vanished, replaced by a woman who looked cold, professional, and weary. She told me the study was supposed to end at the 5-year mark, but the data was too good, and the funding was increased, so she stayed. She admitted she had started to love me, but the contract was her career. And the money, millions of dollars in a trust one never knew about, was for our future. I asked her to wash it off. I wanted to see her. Truly see her. She went into the bathroom and came out 10 minutes later with a clean face. She was beautiful, yes, but she was a stranger. I looked at her and felt absolutely nothing but disgust. She tried to tell me that the emotions were real, that the Sarah I loved was her true personality, just without the physical honesty. But how can you trust a personality that is built on a foundation of professional deception? She actually had the nerve to say, "I did this for us, Mark." The money we have now means we never have to work again." I screamed at her, asking her what us she was talking about. There was no us. There was me, and there was a researcher named Sarah who was analyzing me like a lab rat. I asked her about the cameras. She admitted they were everywhere. In the smoke detectors, the clocks, the mirrors. She'd been uploading my life to a server every night while I slept next to her. The betrayal was so deep it felt physical, like she'd reached into my chest and turned my heart into stone. I realized then that every time I thought we were having a breakthrough or a moment of deep connection, she was probably thinking about how that would look in her final report. She even confessed that some of our fights were staged by her to test my conflict resolution skills under the stress of her supposed health issues. The level of cold-blooded calculation was beyond anything I could comprehend. The climax came when I told her I wanted a divorce, and that I would be suing the agency for emotional distress. She actually laughed, a cold, sharp sound, and told me I'd signed a waiver years ago tucked inside a pile of insurance papers she'd asked me to autograph. She had legally trapped me in my own life. I felt the walls closing in. I realized that the specialist I'd met once or twice was probably an actor. My entire world was a movie set. I grabbed a suitcase and started throwing things in it, but then I stopped. Why was I leaving? This was my house. But then she reminded me, with that same chillingly calm voice, that the house was in her name, purchased through an LLC owned by the agency. I had nothing. 10 years of working, contributing to our home, and I was legally a guest in a laboratory. The aftermath has been a blur of lawyers and silence. I moved out that night, staying in a cheap motel that felt more like home than our mansion ever did, because at least the motel didn't have hidden cameras, or so I hoped. I became paranoid, checking every vent and every mirror for lenses. I found out that the friends we had, our neighbors who we went to BBQs with, half of them were plants from the agency to see how social circles reacted to her condition. One neighbor, a guy I called my best friend for 6 years, was actually a junior researcher tasked with monitoring my peer-to-peer interactions. When I called him to vent, his phone was disconnected. He vanished the same day Sarah did. I lost not just a wife, but my entire social reality. I'm currently in the process of a very messy legal battle to void those waivers, and Sarah, or whatever her real name is, has moved on to a new assignment in a different city. It turns out to her, I was just subject A. My lawyer says we have a slim chance because the paperwork I signed was incredibly thorough, essentially consenting to participation in a long-term observational study, without my explicit knowledge of the parameters. It's a legal loophole large enough to drive a truck through. I spend my nights now looking at old photos, trying to find a moment that was real. Was the time she stayed up with me when I had the flu real? Or was she just checking how my illness affected her data? Was the way she held my hand at my father's funeral real? Or was it a staged empathy response? I'll never know. The mental toll is exhausting. I see her face in every crowd, but then I remember I don't even know what she looks like in different expressions because the makeup always kept her face somewhat stiff. I'm living in a world of ghosts. The moral of this nightmare is that you never truly know someone, and sometimes the person you're willing to take a bullet for is the one pulling the trigger. It's a lesson that cost me 10 years and my sanity. I've started a support group for people who have been victims of social engineering, and you'd be surprised how many of us are out there. People who were used for data without their consent. If you think what she did was unforgivable, and you're on my side in this legal battle, please like this video. It helps me feel a little less alone in this madness. Subscribe for more stories where I'll be updating you on the court case and sharing more of these unbelievable life experiences. I'm going to fight this until the agency is exposed and Sarah has to look a judge in the eye without her makeup or her lies. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I overreact, or is she a monster? Do you think I should take the settlement they're offering to just go away? Or should I burn the whole thing down in public? Thanks for listening to my story. I'll see you all in the next story.